Hi, we're at the Warsaw Security Forum, and I'm sitting here with Dr. Ben Schmitt. Ben is a former colleague at the State Department and a good friend. He is also an astrophysicist, and he is now teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, and is affiliated with the Kleinmann Center for Energy. Have I got that right?
That's right. Kleinmann Center for Energy Policy. That's right.
Yeah, that is great.
Mm-hmm.
And he's here at the forum leading a discussion of critical infrastructure and the importance of that for NATO allies and partners. And so we worked on energy together. And of course, we have seen in these years how important energy and pipelines are as critical infrastructure for security. And
That's
we
right.
really saw that after the invasion of Ukraine. Talk to me a little bit about what other areas of critical infrastructure we might overlook.
Well, Robin, first of all, thank you for having me here. And it's great to be at the Warsaw Security Forum talking about these issues. As I just said in the panel I hosted, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have to consider critical infrastructure. It's not a part of foreign policy or national security that we can kind of overlook because it has. When it's there, you don't think about it. When it's interrupted, whether it's energy, telecommunications, transportation, anything in between, supply chains, uh, it causes massive societal disruptions and can have national security and geopolitical impacts. And so, to answer your question, certainly we talked about European energy security and it the energy systems and infrastructure undergird the entire economy. So certainly that's kind of first and foremost. But of course, telecommunications. Think about a society that lost its cell coverage for a day, an hour, a few minutes. You have the potential for actual unrest and societal disruption. And of course, we have seen attacks across Europe over the past few years since Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine against critical infrastructure, and that includes attacks on rail lines where electricity and telecommunications cables were cut. We have subsea telecommunications cables that support satellite communications facilities for the commercial sector being cut. And of course, we've seen the destruction of pipelines like Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline, the Baltic Connector natural gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia, and a number of other facilities be hit. And this is why it really underscores just how critical infrastructure protection is.
It's so interesting because these attacks happen and it's almost like they're each a one-off. And sometimes you don't get the attribution that
Right.
that would be important. But you've seen a rise in these across Europe and the transatlantic space, right?
Absolutely. And look, I'm the first one to say attribution in these cases is difficult from a technical perspective. And what I mean by that is that these are mostly distributed pieces of critical and energy infrastructure. Pipelines that are thousands of kilometers long, electricity cables that are thousands of kilometers long, and of course rail lines and things like this that are thousands of kilometers long. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to continuously monitor every last centimeter of this infrastructure, and as well as enforce this stuff, right? So to basically apprehend people that are trying to do harm to these pieces of infrastructure. So yes, we've seen an absolute rise in this. This is something that we saw echoes of throughout the 2010s. We've seen Russia attributed to cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. We've seen, interrupting the Nordbalt subsea electricity cable with, the Russian Navy basically intervening and basically interrupting that construction between Lithuania and Sweden. But since Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine, we have seen a drastic uptick, and especially in the last 6 months or so, we have seen on a weekly, if not daily basis, sabotage take place against transportation, against energy, and things like this. We saw a cache of explosives and detonators deliberately buried next to the NATO pipeline network southwest of Heidelberg, Germany. These are really high-profile incidents. It's hard to have attribution, but we have had attribution in some cases against Russian state actors. We've also seen that to a greater extent, and this is partially due to the fact that some NATO member states have taken really big steps in expelling Russian spies and espionage networks in their countries. And of course, Poland is one of those that did a terrific job on kicking out Russian spies early in its war against Ukraine. But what we've seen since then is a rise in Russian military intelligence, the GRU, hiring via Telegram and other social media sources non-Russian nationals, and this includes Belarusian nationals, Ukrainian nationals, Polish nationals, Czech nationals, etc. People that are from Europe that are willing to, low-level goons, let's say, that are willing to be hired for a little amount of money to do a little amount of sabotage. And so, it's kind of the dirty deeds and they're done dirt cheap sort of sabotage situation. And so we've had attribution. So that's why I've called for NATO Article 4 from member states that have had attribution to start basically raising the stakes and the public awareness at the NATO level that Russia's shadow war against NATO cannot go unanswered.
You bring up a good point, because if ever there was a transatlantic issue, it's this one, right?
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about what NATO is doing and can do.
So NATO's been doing a lot on this. I think that they are certainly playing catch up in some cases, but they're really the place to have this sort of synergy, because remember, when we're talking about critical and energy infrastructure protection, especially in the energy space, we're talking about a synergy between militaries. We're talking about a synergy between law enforcement across nation states and the private sector. And so what NATO has done is they've set up first a policy arm at NATO headquarters called the Critical Subsea Infrastructure Protection Cell. That was set up very early on after the Nord Stream blast, just a few months after that in early 2023. And just a few months ago, in spring of this year, in 2024, we saw an operational arm be set up at Marcom in the United Kingdom, the Maritime Command of NATO, to basically start having vessels that are particularly dedicated to critical infrastructure protection and monitoring, and have more of a synergy between the data sources that data sets that are picked up by militaries, by law enforcement, by coast guards, and in particular by the infrastructure operators themselves, because you can have a subsea electricity cable that has embedded within it a fiber optic cable for operations that has at the same time the ability to have hydroacoustic data and other sorts of situational awareness data. So having that all piped together and having a total domain awareness around critical infrastructure, just like we see in the military space, so important. And that's why I think NATO is taking the lead on this.
If there's one recommendation you could make at this point to folks that are leaving this conference, what would it be?
I think NATO needs to invoke Article 4 for attribution of basically Russian actors and Russian hired actors where they have had attribution in NATO member states, that they have basically taken attribution, whether it's in Poland, the Czech Republic, the UK, and France. I'll pick on those four in particular again, because those have had very high level public attribution from their authorities that Russia, the Kremlin specifically, is behind these attacks. And it raises the stake. It doesn't take a direct action, but it goes in the direction of letting the public know that NATO is taking this seriously, that transatlantic leaders are taking this seriously, and most of all, that this will not go undeterred in the future. So that's my call, Article 4.
Thank you, Dr. Ben Schmitt, for joining us for this important discussion. Great panel here. Look forward to our conversations in the future.
Thanks so much, Robin. Appreciate it.